Hello, I'm Todd Meier. I'm a clinical pharmacist at Hayes Medical Center. I'm the pharmacist responsible for the Antibiotic Stewardship Program at Hayes Medical.
I'm Kimberly Koerner. I'm currently the infection preventionist and associate health nurse at Hayes Med, and I am part of the team for the antimicrobial stewardship. About 3 years ago, maybe, I got invited. I think it was just because I kept bugging him enough that he finally just said, "We just come to the meeting."
Okay, a few statistics about Hayes Med. Licensed for 207 beds, average daily census around 85. 207s if we're doubled up and pretty much an all hands on deck sort of situation. So, regional referral center for 24 critical access hospitals, ISO certified primary stroke center. Just last year, infection risk certified, level 3 trauma center, accredited pain center. We have 30 different specialties at our particular hospital. So with our infectious antimicrobial stewardship program, we have an infection control nurse, Kim, myself, a physician, which happens to be a hospitalist. There's several of them that are involved with that. So laboratory, chief nursing officer, OR director, and information technology. So back when we started antimicrobial stewardship, it was around 2011. Back then we really didn't call it that, even though the buzz term did exist. For us, it was trying to get compliant with the SCIP guidelines and stuff, so that we could get paid for our surgeries and stuff. So a lot of order sets, streamlining, coming up with various order sets of that nature. So it started off really simple. We picked off the low-hanging fruit. A lot of these things we were doing already that you'll see on the core elements and stuff. We just hadn't really bundled them into an antimicrobial stewardship program, so to speak. So, and our first formal meeting was around 2015. We have quarterly meetings, and all of those disciplines in the first slide are involved with that. So, setting out the agenda, discussing various resistance patterns, antibiotic usage. A lot of that data gets discussed at these particular meetings. And that's kind of a slide that demonstrates some of that. So nowadays, we're constantly evolving our formulary, looking at resistance patterns. Do we need to add this, delete this, change our infusion schemes like extended infusions, that kind of thing, and tracking those particular things. I actually have a slide in here on C. diff rates. I'll let Kim talk about it. So, but like I said, it started off very simple, and we kind of branched off from there. And I know a lot of the hospitals here might be starting off something like that, and that's kind of how we did it. We just picked off the low-hanging fruit first, and then kind of moved up from there. Just real quick. Some of the fruits of our labors have been better sensitivities, from lower C. diff rates to better sensitivities to various antibiotics for Pseudomonas. Been tracking these things for probably 4 or 5 years now, and also dare I say it that our providers are actually following procalcitonin levels themselves in de-escalating therapy, which is wow. Usually it's always escalate therapy all the time. So, but as with any hospital, there's barriers. There's always some sort of overuse of some sort of antibiotic. Vancomycin is an example. Acceptance by certain physician disciplines on those de-escalation efforts by our pharmacists, and meeting attendance to the antimicrobial stewardship meetings. So they're always claiming they're too darn busy to go. So, and as like I said, pharmacy staffing. Myself, antimicrobial stewardship is a part-time job. Yes, it's an interest of mine and passion of mine, But I am actively involved in the clinical activities, the staffing activities of the hospital as well. So a lot of the stuff that we have done has been, how do you say, kind of an extracurricular activity with myself. So there'll be a lull in the clinical business upstairs on the floor, so I'll go in and prepare the meeting agenda for the next Antibiotic Stewardship meeting. So, I probably get, depending on the schedule, depending on who's taking vacations, I probably get one actual coordinator day, probably every other week or so, to actively work on this particular stuff. So I know a lot of larger hospitals have pharmacists that are entirely devoted to this type of activity. So it's another barrier to being in a smaller hospital. So did you want to talk about C. diff rates?
So of course, being infection prevention, I'm charged with making sure we're preventing infections. It's something that I can really easily take up to the C-suite. I have a quarterly meeting where we discuss everything that we're doing in infection prevention, how we're doing on all the infections hospital acquired. C. diff has been one that really has, we've had to put a lot of effort in it. And of course, my first time I started working on C. diff, it wasn't antibiotic, it was, are we spreading it ourselves? You know, let's see what we're doing in our practice. It has to be, you know, nurses, doctors just transmitting from person to person. But as we kind of cleaned that up, you know, we still had those C. diff cases that were happening, and I noticed they were on all these antibiotics. That's when I started begging Todd. I'm like, hey, can you look at this? Was this appropriate? Are you going to call them? So it kind of started like that. What we've seen actually, I think from beginning with making sure we're doing appropriate practice, but then once we got on top of the actual antibiotics that we're using, we pretty much seen our C. diff rates just fall completely off. Now I don't even see one every month. And you can look, oh, we didn't change it, sorry, you can't see it. Yeah, so you can pretty much see, I think I have 4 years up there of tracking C. diff rates. We have pretty much fallen off. I don't have more than just a couple a year, and unfortunately they usually are tied to overuse of antibiotics. Hospital acquired, yes. So I think one way for somebody that's just getting started, or the IPs that aren't even involved, get yourself involved. Be that little fly on the wall, or that person that just keeps bugging them and asking questions. Sooner or later somebody will recognize that, hey, there might be something they can offer. He may be just looking at antibiotics and doing the antibiograms and other things that are pharmacy directed, but the IP can really look at the infection side of things and go up a whole nother limb off the tree. So the person that champions, the physician that champions me in my infection prevention, I went that direction and said, can you help me? There's infection that's from antibiotics and nobody's listening. And she did. She gave a presentation for me at the physicians meeting. So that was really a good jumping point as far as I'm related to the antibiotic stewardship. And your pharmacists, you really need their help, and you really have to lean on them as well.
Perfect segue. Find a physician champion, someone that you're willing to work with, can talk to pretty much almost on a first name basis. That will go a long way. Because at the end of the day, when you're at these antimicrobial stewardship meetings and you're proactively going through charts, looking at antibiotics, saying, hey, that's inappropriate, at some point that physician is going to have to call that other physician and say, would you like to change to this? I think this is a better option or something like that. So you have to have that person that's willing to do that. If you don't, my experience, yeah, you can call them and ask them, and that they may or may not change, depending on the physician practice. So it is a multidisciplinary effort, as evidenced by all the providers, the people on our team. And I've always been a fan of just being very visible, active on the floors. If that nursing staff, nurse practitioners, physicians get to know you really well, they will come to you with questions, and you will therefore be more actively involved. So that's kind of my advice for others. Our next steps, some of the things that we're actually undertaking right now, we instituted probably a month ago a vancomycin timeout, where we would literally call a physician and ask them, is this truly appropriate? Given time for cultures to come back, PCRs, that kind of stuff, and a full H&P in the chart, obviously. So, and also with our new Meditech that we implemented in February, we have the ability to turn on duration and diagnosis for all antibiotic orders. So that's going to the hospital list on Thursday. So we'll see how that goes. Yeah. So, that is all I have.
So thank you, Steve, again. And I think that he said some things that we talked about are best practices. What did he say? It was best practices. The things we talked about this morning. What did he say? What did they say? Easy wins. Louder. Visibility. They can't trust if they don't know who you are. And when you're there, they will come to you. You kind of is a build it and they will come. But you can't build it inside the pharmacy. You got to build it where the clinical care is being taken care of. What else did we hear? Communication. 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 These were emails you sent, right? No, exactly. Just remember, emails are ways of sharing information, not the way of shaping behavior. Who knows how to shape behavior the best? Which industry has proven it over the last 50 years? Within our world, which industry? The pharmaceutical industry. Right? Do they send emails out to the docs? No, they send young, attractive college graduates to their office. Okay? Men and women. So, in fact, we use this phrase. We call it academic detailing. We've stolen that pharmaceutical detailing. Academic detailing. It's that one-on-one. It's having that conversation. It's creating that relationship. So that's what I heard. What else did I hear? What else did I heard? What else did I hear? You saw the resistance go down. How long have you been doing this?
Actually tracking it?
Yeah.
Probably 4 or 5 years.
Okay. So 80 beds. What went down? Went down before that? Or?
Well, I started tracking.
Yeah. Sure. But when did you start to see it crest and become more susceptible? Okay. But it happens. But it'll happen. I guarantee you it'll happen. I guarantee you it'll happen. And that's pretty powerful. You saw the CDI rates go down. That's another real outcome measure. Doctors fall in their own locales. You give us toys and we'll play with them. Okay? You give me something that I can understand, that I can believe in, that I can track on my own because I don't really want help. Like a procalcitonin level, and I just might surprise you what I do with that. De-escalate the antibiotics when those drop off by logs. I do have a question for you. Why did you choose to use, there's nothing wrong with it, we didn't spend time on defined daily doses, DDD, that's another acceptable way of monitoring. Why did you choose that over DOT? Because it could is probably be the answer. Right. Yeah. I mean, sometimes it's what your software lets you do. It's another way to do it. It doesn't matter. They're both acceptable. I just think DOT for a beginner, particularly the small hospital, is easier. Questions from all of you. There are just tons of pearls in this presentation. So,
if I can, one
please.
thing I can add is I didn't talk about it because they say not to look at financial.
Oh, you can talk about it now.
But that's one thing that I can show in my graphs when I'm in front of administration or I'm up at the C-suite. I put on there how long that patient had to stay unexpectedly after they obtained C-diff and what I found. So I put it on every single one. It's between 7 and 14 days that that patient has to stay in our hospital. That was longer than expected. What can I show from that is finance. How is that impacting us financially, what we cost for this patient? And I'm sure all facilities like ours would say patient safety is first. Well, then we've totally broken that rule and we're giving them something and causing them to stay for 1 or 2 more weeks. And then when they're there, those 2 more weeks, whatever opportunities are coming their way for other issues, whether it be a potty or who knows what, that just puts them at
And 10 years ago, the CFO was licking his chops when you had to keep for another 2 weeks. And now it's zero reimbursement. That's kind of a bad scheme. So that's terrific. Yeah. So you can do and show that the lower cost of antibiotics. You can do and show the lower cost of HAIs. And of course, one of my residents many years ago, came up with the expression. So now they're there for 7 to 14 days, what they should be, right? What else can happen? He came up with this expression: the longer they stay, the longer they stay. There's other things that happen. There's an ADE, there's another HAI, there's all these things. Questions for our friends from Hayes? Come on. Oh, you got a little postprandial glucose and fat surge going on. The brain's getting a little, can you just see those little globules of fat going through your your middle cerebral artery right now? Come on. Why don't you do that? Well, I was they were saying specific for them. Okay, who's next?
Hi, I'm Jody Tieking from Kansas Medical Center in Andover, just outside of Wichita. So just a little bit about our facility. We're a small 58-bed acute care hospital. We have an ED, ICU, med-surg, 6 ORs. We have quite a bit going on. We have a lot of strong emphasis on cardiovascular services, surgeries. We have patients flown in from around the state to our facility for cardiovascular surgeries. We do a number of other surgeries that are listed there. We're a teaching hospital. We have quite a few students of PharmD, nursing, PA, all kinds that do our rotations at our site. We are physician-owned, so we have 150 contracted physicians and over 400 employees. And besides our hospital, we also have a remote ER in Wichita and 4 clinics that we take care of. So just a little bit about our antimicrobial stewardship. We had a program, we opened in 2006, and it was pharmacy driven, and so we had a program going, but we didn't become a strong committee until 2016. We kind of expanded. We're lucky enough, we have an infectious disease physician that on our committee that consults with us, and Joy is our infection control nurse. We also have a hospitalist and CNO on our committee. And there we are. So just talking about the core elements, if you're looking at getting started for pharmacy, if you haven't gotten started yet, a great way to do it is through P&T committee. P&T committees have physicians, administration, nursing, all areas, and that's a great way to get support for your program to get started. As far as drug expertise, smaller hospitals like ours, we don't have infection control pharmacist. Our facility, we have 2 staff pharmacists, or 2 pharmacists, myself as staff pharmacist, so we handle that ourselves. So we're always trying to build educate ourselves, getting BCPS certification, SIDP has an antimicrobial stewardship certification, so I think it's critical to always kind of build your knowledge. Joy will talk a little bit about the tracking and reporting that she does, but it's also important to track and report internally. I'll take our results from our committee meetings and the things we do to the P&T and Medical Executive Committee. Like she had mentioned, it's important to look at cost savings that you're doing for your administration, put numbers on that so you can justify adding more FTEs if needed. So then also, when you go to take action, so our pharmacy, the pharmacy is always looking at the antibiotic orders. Is it the right indication, right drug? We're looking at labs, making sure that the drug they're on is the right one, de-escalating when we can. Also looking at renal dosing and pharmacokinetics. I think probably a lot of you do vanco dosing where the physicians just say, well, we don't want anything to do with it, dose our vanco for us. So we are able to do a lot of those type of things for the hospital. We are not 24-hour pharmacy, so one thing I recommend too is using your computer technology, your CPOE, building order sets and using that type of thing, depending on what software you have. A lot of them have capabilities where it forces physicians to put indications in and can trigger alerts when it's been 24 hours, so whoever opens that patient's chart can see that. So taking advantage of all of those things is important. And then last but not least, I want to talk about education. So again, since we're not there 24 hours, it's really important that the rest of the hospital, the staff, physicians, nursing, and patients have education, and they can do their part on this too. We have PharmD students that come through, so if you have PharmD students, you utilize those students. Every one of mine, it's a requirement that they do some type of antimicrobial stewardship project, education. I did bring some of those today. Later, anybody wants to see any of that information, but it could be something simple. Some of our students have educated surgeons on penicillin and cephalosporin cross-sensitivity. A lot of them have a misconception of that if they're allergic to penicillin, they can't have a cephalosporin, and they go straight to Mako. So that's been helpful. And for educating nursing, something simple like just educating on when to draw Mako troughs. There's been a lot of times where we caught inappropriate adjustments in doses based on troughs that were drawn at the wrong time. So that's valuable. And then also patient education. CDC has a lot of great patient information. We put some things in our patient submission packets and post in our ED telling the difference between virus and bacterial infections and whether you should get antibiotics or not. So those have been helpful. Some of the barriers at our hospital, like I said, we don't have 24-hour pharmacy, and we all kind of wear a lot of different hats. We're not dedicated to just stewardship, so finding the time without adding FTEs to do that has been a challenge. And some of the successes, though, we've been lucky that our administration, our physicians, they're very supportive of everything we're doing. P&T is on board. We have great support through that. Been able to implement a lot of changes, automatic IV to PO orders, where nurses don't have to call physicians, it's just automatic. And so we've been able to implement that through P&T. And also some different things we put into place to optimize some antibiotic regimens like extended infusion Zosyn, so that we were able to get that started. So.
All right. So again, my name is Joy, and I am the infection control nurse. I think Jody did a great job of summing up our committee and what we all do. My role is more educating the staff, monitoring, tracking, and reporting on multi-drug resistant organisms such as C. diff. But honestly, I cannot do this unless I am educated. So I will say I am constantly on the Kansas Healthcare Collaborative website, APIC, CDC, CMS. In fact, all those websites might be elevating me to creepy status because I am seriously on their websites all the time. Because I don't feel like I can do a good job with my role unless I am educated for sure. So the next slide. We start out, we educate our medical providers. So how do we do this? This is obviously one of our challenges. For instance, the CDC recently came out with surgical site infection prevention guidelines. And so we as a committee drafted a letter and approved it with administration and sent it out to all of our physicians that are contracted for our hospital and sent it out to their personal address so they were aware of the new updates. Our medical, we have a medical board of directors and they meet frequently, and I go to all those meetings and I tell them about our trends, any regulations or guidelines that they need to know about. So once again, that has been verbalized multiple times, I think today, is just to be present and be seen. I'm constantly educating nurses. You know, before I was an infection control nurse, I was in the emergency department, And I remember having a state surveyor coming up to me and saying, okay, what's the difference between this purple top wipe and this orange top wipe? And honestly, at the time, I couldn't tell her. I had no idea. I knew that I cleaned with them in between patient use, but nobody had ever told me what the difference was between those. So I just tried to put myself in their shoes, what they need to know, you know, just real nursing, and go from there. We do it at new hire. We have an annual infection control employee health day, and obviously more frequently as needed. So we also educate our patients and visitors on NDROs. So as Jody mentioned in our admission packets, we have a one-page handout about C. diff and the risks with C. diff and what patients and visitors can do to reduce their chance of getting C. diff with antibiotics and hand hygiene and so on. We also talk to them, we talk to visitors and tell them, hey, make sure you're using the hand hygiene. It's located right there by the door every time you go in and out, just to help reduce that chance of you getting a multi-drug resistant organism. You know, so constantly talking to the visitors and the patients about that. Next slide is, so I'm constantly tracking for not only healthcare associated infections, but NDROs. I have a daily culture report that I get, and I look specifically for NDROs. And then I review the chart. I find out, was this hospital acquired, was it community acquired? And then from there, do we have, is it a nursing problem? Is it a certain physician problem? And keep good track and trends on that. And then I report it to our committee when we meet. I'm reporting also not only to our committee, but I report the trends to our medical providers, to our nurses, key stakeholders. And then if we find a problem, we just come to a conclusion as a team and come up with a good solution.
I'm Dr. Keck Hartman. I'm an adult infectious disease specialist in Wichita, Kansas. I'm involved with the infection control and antibiotic stewardship program at Kansas Medical Center in Andover. I've been doing antibiotic programs in Wichita for over 20 years. We used to call it antibiotic streamlining. At least in Wichita we did. The concept there was, how can we improve antibiotic use, target the organisms, and at that point in time, pharmacokinetic data and mechanisms of antibiotic killing bacteria were becoming talked about. And so we were interested in switching from IV to oral antibiotics when available and using pharmacokinetic data for dosing of antibiotics. Also back at that time, antibiotics, I think, were responsible for a much larger percentage of pharmacy budgets than they are now. Maybe in smaller hospitals they're still pretty prominent budget item, but in the larger hospitals, you know, the cancer drugs have just become phenomenally expensive, and costs of antibiotics, frankly, have diminished as a percentage. And so what used to be an argument in terms of trying to save money by decreasing antibiotic use is now, I think, better reflected in this new term of antibiotic stewardship, which implies that we are stewards of appropriate use, and we're stewards of bacterial resistance, and we're stewards of decreasing hospital-acquired infections and drug resistance. So about, I don't know, a few years ago, Jody came to me and said she wanted to get this antibiotic stewardship program ramped up, and I'd been at KMC for several years already, involved in the infection control activities, and was more than happy to help out with the stewardship program. Part of my activities is reviewing the antibiotics that every patient in the hospital is on every day. When I first got started doing this 20 years ago, that meant sitting down with a pharmacist and reviewing the IBM computer printout, the IBM sheets, computer printouts of the patients, and then we'd identify patients that looked like there might be an opportunity to do something different. Then we'd traipse around the hospital, this is a much larger hospital, find the chart somewhere, and then if we decided to make a recommendation, we had these little blue slips we'd fill out, write the recommendation, tape it on the front of the chart. It was not part of the medical record. And then we go back the next day to see if the physician, made any changes. And most of the time they did. And that was successful, at least in terms of that activity at that point in time. It's become a lot easier with the electronic medical record. So these days, I go to the hospital, and I have some patients that I am following in consultation already. But then I ask I go to the pharmacy, and they printed out a printout of all the patients on IV antibiotics in the hospital for that day. So I go through the list, and there's usually about 15 patients on that report every day. I can exclude some of them because I'm already seeing them in consultation. Some of them are just getting IV antibiotics for surgical prophylaxis. And then the other patients are getting some form of treatment. They've come in through the ER or admitted since the previous morning. So a great advantage of being in a small hospital is there are only very few physicians that you need to deal with. And walking around the hospital, you can see all of them within the space of about 15 minutes. If I don't see them, I can text them. But I review the medical record in the EMR. I just sit down with that list, that printout, and the patients I'm not familiar with that look like they're getting treated for something. I open up the EMR, under peer review, which I've been given status to do, and look and see what the situation is. Some of them are just obviously going to be there for a day or two, and I don't really have to get involved. But if somebody's been admitted with pneumonia or an undefined abdominal infection syndrome, they're probably going to be there for a while. So I'll talk to the physician and see what their take on the patient is and how they're doing, and whether or not it would help for me to get involved. And sometimes I just make a simple recommendation to them on the spot as to what to do with the antibiotics if they need to do anything different, or they'll ask me to see the patient in consult. So doing that, I review about 8 or 10 patients that I'm not seeing. I get a couple of those a day warrant a consultation, and so I see those. It takes me, not doing a consult, but reviewing these patients, talking to the physicians, takes me about 30 minutes, which 58-bed hospital, that's pretty reasonable. Anyway, the Antibiotic Stewardship Program obviously usually start with the simple, obvious things like, can you switch from IV to PO? Monitor, the pharmacist can look and see if the antibiotic matches the organism. Does this antibiotic make sense for the infection that's being treated? Reviewing things after 2 to 3 days to see if we still have an infection problem or need to switch gears with the treatment. Monitor for interactions, look for need for renal dosing of antibiotics. Things like that can be done very simply by knowledgeable pharmacists. But there's other things that I do I think are helpful beyond that. And it really helps to have a physician involvement if you can get it. And that is matching the duration of antibiotics to the diagnosis. Physicians start antibiotics for pneumonia and they think we've got to treat this patient for 7 or 10 days with IV antibiotics. So I can help with that, or a physician that you're working with can help with that. There are lots of good guidelines available now that are relatively new in the field of medicine. And especially with infectious disease, you can find treatment guidelines for just about every common clinical infection scenario. With pneumonia, community-acquired versus aspiration versus nosocomial-acquired, pneumonias, urinary tract infections, abdominal infections. You can find some general recommendations for types and duration of treatment. And that's something that you all can keep up on. You can read those and help suggest these guidelines, general statements to the physicians. But of course, that's something I can do quite easily with physicians. I can also help them match the empiric antibiotic regimen to the clinical syndrome. Sometimes physicians are confused about what to do if a patient has bacteremia. If it's an E. coli bacteremia from a urinary tract infection, they're not quite sure sometimes if that means they have to continue IV antibiotics longer than if the blood cultures were negative. Or sometimes a patient has Staph aureus bacteremia, and the physician may not recognize that that patient needs to be on IV antibiotics longer than they thought, and that patient needs to have follow-up blood cultures done to make sure the bacteremia has been cleared. So I can help very easily get involved in those kinds of decision-making processes. And then, of course, when I'm, especially when I'm seeing the patient, I can help assess the response to treatment. But even without seeing the patient, I can do that just a lot of times by just reviewing the chart. And a quick discussion with the physician give me a clue as to whether the patient's responding as expected or might need consideration of different treatment. I think those are four areas that I think it's helpful to have physician involvement. And if you don't have somebody on site, then there is expertise available to you. My partners and I field phone calls every day from physicians from 3/4 of the state about treatment of complicated patients or antibiotic questions, and we're always available to help out in that way. If we got a call from your antibiotic stewardship pharmacist about that patient for some suggestions, we'd be happy to help answer questions like that too. So that's just a little bit about what I do with our program. I'd like to say also that it's a lot easier these days for me to do this because there are knowledgeable pharmacists, pharmacists that are knowledgeable about infection problems and antibiotics, and that wasn't so common in the past. And the infection control nurses are all over this stuff now, and we're being forced to do this by not only hospital administrations, but the national owners of the hospital chains that we work in, and also by the accrediting committees. So the administration of the hospital recognize that these programs are more important, and so that helps make this job a little bit easier to sell. Great.
So many good points. I'm going to underscore 2 or 3 for the sake of time, and then we'll hold some questions. Jody, who goes to the board? How's that go? Because I love the fact you're bringing this right to the board.
It actually goes really well. I don't know. We're physician-owned hospitals, so these physicians that are right there, I mean, they actually have they do the ownership in it. So I don't know if that might be a little bit helpful on my side, but they really do act like they care about the trends. So, and I think just being there on a consistent basis, they expect me to be there. They know I'm going to be there. So,
and that's so once again, visibility, like you all pointed out over there. There's visibility to the docs. There's visibility to the board and the owners. But I've worked with small hospitals, with community boards. They behave the same way. When you bring them something and you make it important and clear, transparent, honest, open. Here's just the data. You don't bring data slog. You don't bring actionable information that they can look at. Because antibiotic stewardship, people get this now. People get that if we're not doing it well in the hospital, that we're all at risk in the community. And so I just think that's an important thing. The other thing I want to underscore, we talked about earlier, was upstreaming this to the patient and family and beginning to educate that and decreasing that demand for antibiotics. And you mentioned something I'd forgotten. CDC has this stuff. It's free. All you got to do is go get it and start putting it up. So this is not hard. You don't have to sit down and create a committee and create a document. It's done for you. You just go get it and do it. There really is no barrier there, whatever. So I think those were two really important things I wanted to point out. And I do agree that this could be done, and as you pointed out, this could be done in your hospital if you have the resources, or it can be done more remotely. But it is available. In today's world, this is a phone call away. What percent of these patients do you feel like you really have to go put your hand on the belly in order to advise the doctors? Yeah. So most of this is tele-ID. It really is, and it can be done that way. So this is all good stuff. It just builds on what they're doing at Hayes. So with that, we have one more group, right?
I'm Katie Foster, I'm the Pharmacist Clinical Manager at Stormont Vail.
And I'm Dr. Joanne Harris, I do Pediatric Infectious Disease. And Katie and I do tag team a lot of places, talk about antibiotic stewardship. We started our program in 2010 at the request of our adult ID doctor, actually. Adult didn't have enough time, so we stepped up to the plate to start this program. And both of these facilities have done some fantastic things. You're going to hear a little bit more about the barriers that we face.
So we formalized this, like you said, in 2010. It is medical staff multidisciplinary committee. Can you hear me okay? No? Okay, can you hear us now? Just to get closer. So we started this as a medical staff committee in the hospital. We do not have one pharmacist dedicated to antibiotic stewardship. So we've trained all of our pharmacists to be able to do antibiotic stewardship practices. At that time, we did not have EPIC. So we did as well have a note called the Stormont Vail Cares Campaign. So the pharmacists made recommendations. We still have the paper chart for the providers, and they would put on there too if they accept or made some of the recommendations we had. We also,
just a little bit about us. So we are a bigger hospital, so we take that into account. It's a 586 licensed bed care referral center in Northeast Kansas. It's a magnet hospital. It's a trauma 2 level. It's a NICU level 3 stroke MI double joint center. It serves the city of Topeka, which is about 150,000 people, and 13 counties in Northeast Kansas. So it's about 580,000 people. That is our area. We're affiliated with the HINC network, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. We have 30 facilities associated with Stormont Vail. We have 450 physicians with medical staff privileges, and I just want to highlight that. Influencing 450 physicians, I hope I need sympathy. Lots. There's 250 physicians employed by Stormont Vail. They're easier, right? They're employed. And there's almost 6,000 employees at Stormont Vail. So we're talking about a whole different level of antibiotic stewardship. And we can talk a little bit more about the barriers.
so one of the things we do every year is complete the CDC gap analysis, which we did then as well, so that we can look at the areas we need to improve our antibiotic stewardship. We also looked at the pharmacy budget to see what our high utilizers of antibiotics were as well. And then also review our antibiogram susceptibility, see if anything was less than 90%.
The multidisciplinary committee, as you know, getting physicians to committees is a little bit of a challenge. But for some reason, offering lunch was a big incentive, and we actually did get fairly good physician input to the committee, which we were pretty proud of. But it took a lot of time. This didn't happen overnight. I just want to emphasize that. This took quite a while to actually get accomplished.
So other things we've done is like targeted antimicrobial use for appropriateness, like those are pneumonia antibiotics back then, so reviewed IDSA guidelines, and pharmacists and other committee members reviewed to make sure our antibiotics are appropriate based on order sets, as well as we started seeing some rapid diagnostic testing come into the institution with like the GI panel. One of the things that people realized is like, what's shigellosis? How do we treat it? Or how do we treat salmonella? So we had another initiative where we developed a treatment guideline for the GI panel with a pharmacy residency program, which they developed, which was approved by medical staff and embedded into our lab data. But again, we had to manually extrapolate, and sometimes still do, targeted antibiotics to see if we're using it appropriately or not.
One of the problems that people bring up about the budget and what's in the literature and what we found is you're really not going to reduce your pharmacy budget costs for the most part. We found that different contracts, you'd have different costs, different years. Some of the more common antibiotics have increased in cost because all the other antibiotics are being used. And we really wanted to steer clear of using budget or finances about antibiotics as our marker. That was not sitting well with the bean counters, who wanted to look at that. The other thing, we had an overuse of Zosyn, and so we limited the use of Zosyn, took it off some of the order sets, and what happens is that other antibiotics balloon. So you squeeze the Zosyn, and we ballooned up meropenem. So it's a challenge on all levels to try and limit use of some antibiotics without getting the balloon of the others. Manual extrapolation, we have EPIC. It's a wonderful EMR. It does not give us good data. So even though we have this fancy EMR system, it didn't give us the data we needed, and anything we looked at for antibiotic utilization was manual pull.
In the last year and a half, 2 years, Stormont now has care discovery, and so we've been playing around with that data this last year. And so we can compare like a DRG for pneumonia now and look at some national comparative data for antibiotic usage. And so that's been kind of helpful to, again, being able to target our vancomycin usage. You know, are we over or below the national benchmark, and so forth. And that's been pretty helpful this last year, this care discovery.
So the CPOE, I think it amuses some people, but our hospitalists are terrific, but it was very difficult to get them to use order sets. And they like to make their own orders and, you know, do one-offs, etc. So through the wisdom of our head of hospitalist program, it got a financial link to using the order sets. And that was amazingly successful.
So some of the other barriers of success, like Dr. Harris mentioned about the order sets, Antibiotic Stewardship Committee reviews all order sets that has antibiotics on it. And so we assign certain pharmacists or individuals expertise in that area to make sure those antibiotics are appropriate. They do use probation, but we still look at our, of course, antibiotic susceptibilities and any new national guidelines, like the C. diff guidelines came out in February. We're just updating our new GI order set, and so we, of course, incorporated those as well.
I think that, you know, that sounds like it's great, right? Happened right away? Oh, no. This took several years. Okay, so I don't want you to get the impression that you're going to walk in tomorrow and say, oh, we're going to use this and it's going to happen next month. It took many committees. So we answered a P&T, and I have to say it's an excellent committee, but not for antibiotic stewardship. They didn't comprehend all of the issues around infection control or prevention or antibiotic stewardship, so they would table one of our initiatives. And then they didn't meet the next month, and so then the following month we would get it out of P&T, and then it had to go to QIC. And then the doctors that didn't show up to our antibiotic stewardship meeting decided that they wanted to say something about our initiative, and so it got tabled there. and then we would scramble and get it back, and then it finally would go to medical exec. Are you with me? Anyone else experience that? So that a lot of these initiatives with this kind of, and that's where the small hospitals have a huge advantage, because I also consult to Newman Hospital and Emporia, and it's more facile than if you're getting into a bigger hospital situation. So just realize, you'll see when Katie talks about the cha-cha, what we're talking about here.
So one of the things like with Hayes Medical Center's antibiotic surgical prophylaxis, we're trying to figure out why or how we can improve the antibiotic surgical prophylaxis. And then we found out that not all surgeons entered their orders. It was their nurses. So we had to go educate all of their nurses and PAs or APRNs to make sure they're selecting proper antibiotics prior to surgery.
Yeah, so, and what we did is we went to the OR and looked at the amount of vancomycin being used for surgical prophylaxis and realized that we had a high volume, way more than anyone could be penicillin allergic, realizing that, well, you know, I vomited when I was a child, therefore I can't use penicillin. I mean, I'm sure you've all come across that. So we started charting that. We then instituted a penicillin allergy testing program that we piloted, but then that wasn't moving forward because we didn't have the will of the surgery department that would help us move it forward. So it took several years to get the will, and then the allergists, even though they were supposed to come to them, weren't really excited about it either. So again, I think if the whole will issue of getting your champions involved is enormous because it really held us back.
So we currently do not do DDD or DOT. We've tried. We've had a pharmacist that did look at all of the MERIM for DOT, and she did all the calculations and everything. But we are moving towards the EPIC antibiotic stewardship module. We have it, but we're getting it more embedded with the IP program. So we'll be able to look at DOTs here in the next 4 to 6 weeks.
And that was one of our biggest concerns that we brought up to administration. And again, you have to have the will. They were certainly willing to support us in our efforts. We did get lunch at our meetings. But in fact, they didn't understand the time and the amount of effort that it would take. And so, for example, our goal, like everyone else's, is to review antibiotics in 48 to 72 hours. We did not have the pharmacists up on the floor that could do that. And so we kept telling them that, and we're still working on trying to get clinical pharmacists rounding with all the hospitalists so that we can actually have that done. So that although it looks good on paper, and we could do the gap analysis, and of course you have the gap analysis is what's real, and the gap analysis is what your administration wants to see. Oh yeah, you have that, you do that, right? And so I think you have to be realistic on what you can and can't do and move that forward. We just don't have enough clinical pharmacists to give that kind of feedback. We have pharmacists in the ICUs, on the pediatric floor, in the NICU, in the emergency room, 24/7 actually. 1 minute. Yeah, and then we try having and the hospitals love having pharmacists around with them. It's like heaven on earth. But we just can't accommodate all the pharmacists all the time. So there are barriers to what we can do. And so we keep working on it, and keep pushing it, keep working on it. We did try and get antibiotic indications, and we have them set up in the EMR system, and that took 3 years. Because that's the other barrier. If you're using an EMR system, then you're at the mercy of the IT people, right? And then you'll put in your request, or you have to put in a written request. Who puts in a written request? We have to put a written request in, and then we have to wait our turn. And so, you know, we're sitting here like this, and we have, you know, when is this happening? And then if you change your system, then we encounter this one. If you change your system, all the initiatives that we put in, like our treatment plans for our PCR testing, disappeared. And they weren't there, they were gone. and we had to start all over. So, you know, there's these little subtle things that we come across that we've been battling since 2010, but we really do pretty well.
And I was going to mention, one of the things too with EMRs is you can turn and switch for all medication indications. That's what we had in the past. We had the new Epic upgrade this last couple months. And so we're able to now select medications for those or you can have mandatory indications on. So it's not all or nothing. And so that's has changed with the Epic system in the last couple months. Some advice to everybody is never to give up to do the right thing. Sometimes like doing the cha-cha with anything you may do, you might go 2 steps forward, 1 back, 1 step forward, 2 back. But eventually you do get over to what your desired outcomes are.
The other thing is, whoever you are on the team, you know, I was probably the only physician out of 450 that actually spent routine time in the pharmacy. So it's very important that the physician, the pharmacist know who in that interaction, but I think it takes an effort also on the other side to get to know your pharmacist as well. So it's a two-way street, it's a multidisciplinary process, and incentives work really great, like lunch, and to be available both ways, so everyone knows who you are. Both the physician needs to know the pharmacist, and we go down to the pharmacy all the time, I did, to talk to the pharmacist, to educate the pharmacist, to kind of educate, because we had the basement pharmacist and the clinical pharmacist. The clinical pharmacists were well educated, probably had pharmacy residencies or did the online courses, right? Your basement pharmacists have a different idea what, you know, and so one of the things we came across was that if a pharmacist gave the wrong information to the doctor, that was it, they were done. They only call Kate. And so you can tell that, and the ED pharmacist. So, you know, it does take a whole village to accomplish some of this, but it isn't as straightforward as you might think. You have to be patient and persistent and know how to do the cha-cha.
So next steps, again, we always do the CDC gap analysis for the hospital ambulatory. Just in the last couple of months, we now have a joint antibiotic stewardship program with our community or clinic setting too. So we have one antibiotic stewardship program. Look at your antibiograms yearly to see if there's any resistance change. Review any guidelines up there as well to make sure all your information is up to date. Like I mentioned, we have the improving your epic antibiotic stewardship module. So they give like more targeted drug-bug mismatch so the pharmacist knows if something's positive or not. So we're not going through all the patients. So behaviors, positive culture, antibiotic may be appropriate, please review. Penicillin testing, we're trying to get that spread out through other surgical procedures. We do offer this test throughout the organization or allergy clinic. We found out that we have about 23,000 people allergic to penicillin in our health system. So we're trying to go through and figure out what is truly an allergy and what is a side effect, some of this penicillin allergy testing. And just recently, one of our residents did an ED antibiotic culture review. So if they have susceptibilities, come back within 48 hours to review it per protocol and make sure those antibiotics are appropriate. If not, then they can go ahead and order those appropriate antibiotics.
Yeah, so it's different in a larger facility, but some of the philosophical questions and the barriers are the same. Human nature, right? So the other thing is you can't forget the patient in this. And what we found with our penicillin testing is we had this whole system set up, and the patients that said they were allergic pre-surgery, they had a month to go get their penicillin allergy testing, you know, and then there was the copay. Who was going to pay the copay? Then there was, the patient lived in Manhattan but was having the surgery in Topeka. They didn't want to come back. And it wasn't required, and we tried to encourage the orthopedic doctors to say, before you do an elective procedure, this is a requirement, like you get your blood drawn and your EKG in your hospital, your physician exam. And they were very hesitant because they didn't want to turn off their referral doctors. So human nature, you have to always take that into account.
Well, I want to thank you. Before we give you all a round of applause and then open for questions, one of the things whenever I do these, kind of advanced, I listen to hospital stories. One of the things I'm seeking is the unvarnished truth. Because sometimes people get up there and do the dog and pony show. That did not happen today. Okay, and I just want you to appreciate that. Everybody told you their stories with warts and everything. The last one was particularly unvarnished and refreshing, and I appreciate that. So let's give all of them a round of applause. I appreciate that. And I was going to ask the question. You took my thunder, so that's perfect. I'm glad you did. You're talking about all the committees and everything. I'm thinking, well, the critical access hospitals don't have all these committees. They get 7 people in the line. They get 7 people in the hallway, and they're done. And so I think while you are thinking about you for the small hospitals, about some of this, how it's not possible, you can't bring all these resources, you have assets they don't have.
Right.
And that is agility. You can make changes much faster when you want to. And so I think that's perfect. I want to talk about pen allergy testing. What's the, this is a big push. It was a big push of the CDC with good reasons. Because you look back on it, the most common thing that I decided in my clinical practice was they did get an allergy when they got their penicillin when they were 5 because they had a viral exanthem and they never should have had the penicillin in the first place. And it just happened to be, coincidental. It was not causative at all. It was just that they both happened at the same time because the virus caused it. My memory of the literature is something like 98% of people who say that are not.
That's correct.
98% are not. So think about all the Vanco that's getting pumped out there. Think about it. This is not a small. We're leaving a big treasure trove buried in the ground. We don't tackle this. And I believe any organization can do this. And I don't think you need to have a board-certified allergist to do skin testing.
Except if you talk to your allergist.
Well.
You have to talk to your allergist, and they not only want to do the pre-pen, but they want to do the extra piece because there's like.
Okay, so critical access hospitals who don't have allergists, get on your way. Let's go.
Go for it.
Don't talk. Don't. This is like mom. Don't ask. Just do it on a Saturday night. Just go.
I absolutely agree. I think the other thing that people don't recognize, which the allergists really are helpful, will tell you is that someone that truly had anaphylaxis, if it was greater than 10 years ago, they probably won't have anaphylaxis after 10 years. So
they're probably allergic.
But the issue becomes it's such a touchy topic, and if it's 0.1% of my patient, I'm not going to put them at risk, So
but there's a whole interview process that you go through and a whole checklist process. I mean, if you go through this and they say, yeah, it was 10 years ago and my lips all swelled up and I had trouble breathing, we're done. We're done. We're talking about the people who said, my mother told me, I don't remember, I was really small, I threw up.
Right.
Yeah. Well, we are picking on that group that probably has a 99.999% chance of not being. So we're screening out the ones that might have a catastrophic result if we do this.
Mayo Clinic has been doing it on
Yes.
their pre-surgeries, their pre-op, and the RNs do it.
Yep.
And there's some places talking about having pharmacists do the skin testing, having a physician within the locale in case you need something. But from the few that we've done, which should of course be much higher, we really haven't found a problem that,
And there are a lot of allergy clinics in this country where the allergists aren't, where an RN does do the skin testing and then these available.
Yes, there's also, I've seen some protocols out there. You do an oral or IV challenge. You do a test dose, and then no reaction within an hour or so. Try the rest of the medication. So I have seen that in hospital institutions too.
I've seen that where I've done that when we didn't have a choice but to do that.
Right.
That was the drug, and so you give it to them and give them a small dose, give that primer dose, and see what happens. If you're still alive in an hour, you give them the rest.
The other thing that we found, and the point you brought up that I want to emphasize, is when you get this multidisciplinary group together with staff people, staff pharmacists, staff nurses, you will find out a lot about what's happening that you had no idea. So we were finding out that surgical prophylaxis was, the cut was happening before the antibiotic was fully in. And we're going, excuse me? Well, we were told 10 years ago that we can do that. And trying to get that reversed because it slows flow through the OR if you stop and give the Vanco, which is another reason not to use Vanco, right? Because it takes too long.
2 hours.
So, but you know, you find these things out and you kind of go, really? That's really happening? So, you know, that's another beauty of having the staff nurses and, oh yeah, Dr. So-and-so cuts as soon as we start the antibiotic.
Let me make one more point about
Please.
the penicillin allergy. It's pretty easy to screen patients just by doing a questionnaire about what their allergy reaction was, and most of the time it's not a true allergy. Or even if they did have a what sounds like a bona fide allergy with a rash, which is most of those, 90+%. Only less than 10% of those patients will react to cephalosporin. The reason why that's important is not just to decrease vancomycin use, but a study was reported just within the last 2 years. And I don't think I'm overstating this. I think it was about 30,000 patients were reviewed for pre-op prophylaxis. The incidence of surgical site infections was increased 50% in patients that did not receive primary recommended prophylaxis, which is almost always a cephalosporin. So even if it's, you know, there's a good reason for giving the alternative antibiotic for prophylaxis, there's a 50% higher risk of surgical site infection. So if you translate that against all the patients that are receiving something besides a cephalosporin when they really could have gotten that, you can, that is not a subtle number, and that's a number surgeons will pay attention to. So it just points out the importance of making, you know, identifying these patients that are truly allergic.
Great. Questions? We have a few more minutes before we're going to take a quick stretch break. I was sitting over there in the corner, which is unfortunate because all I've done is smell brownies for 20 minutes. It's a bit of a distractor. Yeah, fresh out of the bakery brownies. Questions, comments for any of our panelists who I really commend for their honesty and bravery. Comments, questions? They answered everything you ever wanted to know. Any of the staff back there, KHA, state, anybody have questions for this group? Oh, there's a question here. I don't know, you have my mic here. Oh, Britta's coming right behind you.
For Stormont, Vail, they were talking about you put treatment guidelines in your lab report for your GI panel.
And respiratory, meningitis, and blood.
And we're also having right now cellulitis as well, which has been great. It's really lengthy, but it gives you like what the organism is, what the etiology is, and treatment, or even if it's just symptomatic treatment. They were reviewed by the medical staff at Antibiotic Stewardship Committee, and once they are approved, we put them up on our policy site, and they incorporate that link or embed it into our lab results. So any provider can go and select that information, or you can also look at an order set. You can just pull that up too and see that information as well.
So we all know our friendly physicians, right? They don't scroll down.
Nope. Or over.
So what happened was that on every micro report that they looked at on the computer, if you scroll down, you would see the links. And of course, everyone was educated. And then you would say to them, because as ID, I would get the call, what's saprovirus, right? Or whatever. And I would talk to them, tell them the treatment guidelines were there, and they'd go, oh, I didn't know that. So, and we also put the antibiogram on every microbiologic report. So if they scroll down, there's all this information to click away, one click. Just click that and it will pull up these guidelines for them to use as treatment, as well as Provation provides up to date for them right in the order, you know, if they're trying to order something. but you have to get them to scroll down.
Or you have to reorder the way it appears. I mean, maybe it's not possible, but I mean, this is no different than sending something to your CEO, right? So, you know, tell them what you're going to tell them and then tell them. So you can even set this up so there's just links. You know, and we've seen this on some web pages that you might go to. It's all there, but a link takes you to this page and this page and this page. So what I've seen sometimes is that everything they need to have is on the page that doesn't scroll, like your results. You may have to click on that. You have to play with it and see how it works, but I don't know that we're ever going to get them to scroll. I mean, in my EMR, when we put in example, when we put in Epic, fortunately we did a whole bunch of testing and scenario testing and all of that. Pharmacists in the audience will just have their hair stand up. So we built all of the order strings. Then we ran physicians through test scenarios and nurse informaticists. And guess what the docs did? They often picked the wrong order string. Why? Because they had to scroll to the right to get the dose and frequency. And we're human. I mean, you know what? Humans in a hurry. It's not just docs, it's humans in a hurry. So we had to, before we went live, reorder all of the order strings. That is a huge task. But can you imagine if we had not discovered that? So I think that wherever you can get them not to scroll is actually the best thing.
The other trick we learned was that when you had the orders, like what antibiotics you wanted for community-acquired pneumonia, I'm just picking on that, what you want them to use the most, put on top.
Yeah.
Because, you know, I love my colleagues, I really do, but they will click the top.
Yep, that's true human nature. So I read this fascinating article about restaurants. So what is the first thing the waiter or waitress does when they come to your table? They give you a menu and then they tell you the specials. And it turns out in this country, more often than not, the specials are yesterday's leftovers. And so they're on top because they want to move them before they throw them out. Is that so true? Not every restaurant, but many. It's the, okay. So you put it on top, you tee it up, right? On top. That first thing is the answer to it. Yeah, we humans are really odd. Anyway, any more questions before, I'm between you and the brownies right now.
I don't have a question, but I have a comment.
Yes?
We have, I don't know if anybody's aware, we have a Kansas Pharmacy Antibiotic Stewardship Program, or committee that is, we have a website as well. It's under the HIAIAR website. It has a lot of good pharmacy tools that you can use for both the hospital and the community setting. If anybody's interested in learning about the Kansas Pharmacy Committee, task force that we have, we actually have a meeting in a week and a half. We try to look at different issues and how we can educate the state of Kansas based on pharmacy antibiotic stewardship principles. If you're interested, just let me know.
Great. And one last thing I would just say to the pharmacists and the IPs in the room, educate yourself about antibiotics. Put yourself in this position to have the confidence to go have that conversation. So if you didn't have special training in ID, get the madid.org. Get the sidp.org. Get that. You may have the knowledge, but you have the confidence to be able to push with that pushback. And so I just think that will put you in a better place, and that's part of the will. It's part of the will. One last comment?
You said those initials real well. On
You betcha. It's on the slide deck, my slide deck, but it's MAD-ID. It's like mad about infectious disease. MAD-ID.org. That's open to anyone. Your great-grandmother can take it, okay? Anyone. Your SIDP is the Society of Infectious Disease Pharmacists, SIDP.org, and they have a special certification program for pharmacists. So pharmacists, I recommend you do that. The only reason you might not is if you're going to do the MAD-ID pharmacist, you have to drag your IP and a physician champion so that you all get exposed to the same course at the same time. And I think you create some synergy when you do that. But otherwise, sidp.org for the pharmacist. Yes, ma'am. Microphone behind you.
I just wanted to let people know that we did do that at our hospital, the MAD ID, and you actually can sign up for waivers. And so I think depending on the hospital size, you might get 2 or 3 people that can do it for free.
And if it's not free and it's $500 a person and your organization doesn't have the will to shell out what my CFO called budget dust, $1,500, and go on and work on something else. I mean, really, you know, you're voting with their feet if they won't support. I mean, you know, we're not talking about time. We're just talking about the tuition. So try to get it for free. But I think you have the right to challenge if they're not willing to have 3 people do it out of the hospital's pocket.
I think the other thing is when you have a mock survey or your CMS surveyor comes in and makes a complaint about stuff, that really moves your administrators.
Yeah, so their number is 1-800-CALL CMS. All right, we're going to take a short stretch break. Let's regroup no later than 2:30, and then we're going to have you create action plans so you walk out of here with more than just knowledge and entertainment, but with specific plans for your organization. Okay, go raise the brownies.